Yes, you're welcome to. Like, I'm going to leave this up here for people to use. I've got all the stuff, like in tabs. So, but you prefer to use your own laptop?
Yes.
Then go ahead and knock yourself out. Yes.
And you will need one of those for our presentation, please.
We have another one up here. Yeah. So just to let you know, guys, we're running just a little bit late because we're waiting for some of our judges who are in a steering group meeting. So probably we're going to be running 5 or 10 minutes late, depending on when they get back. Oh, you're welcome.
It wasn't me, it was the microphone.
No worries. Oh.
We have one judge.
A lot of responsibility, a lot of weight on you now.
Oh, here comes the second judge. Right here.
Oh, they're in a steering committee meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go get the pens.
Ah, yes.
Good idea.
Yeah. Have a seat at the judges' table.
Are you judgy too?
I am. Where do I need to go?
Most of the. Can you hold on to this for me? So what we're going to do is we're going to do the things on paper and then pass them down to Rosie, who's going to enter them. So you don't need your laptops. You just
No, I need a pen.
You need a well. Actually, Rosie's going to get pens, so you don't even need a pen. We can provide that.
No, we don't. No. Well, we need more judges than that. The judges should come over. Oh. then we need the score sheets. This is a hot mic.
But do you know what that means? Yeah, wait the key.
Yeah. Hello.
Me and the co-chairs for the ideas challenge. So there's a table over there, so you can read it.
Oh, okay.
Right now.
Right now. Okay.
You judge it.
I told you I would.
Yes, proceed.
Welcome. Yeah.
Yes.
Same.
I am ready to judge all of you. I am
Everybody's on one seat.
I brought a handful from my desk. This is what I had. One of them is a stamp.
A staff just ran off because I sang.
So,
Adopted that box.
if you guys could just
It's a good box.
it may not be a perfect fit for what the presentation is, but also if it's a non-technical solution to a non-technical problem, that's fine. Don't judge it based on the technical merit, but on also the organizational merit. If you pass the score sheets to Rosie, don't forget to mark the team name.
You don't care about our names though.
No.
Okay.
No. So essentially, you're just choosing how high, and the categories are kind of always inclusive of the one below. So when you go up a step, it's to fill all the below requirements, and then some more, and then some more, and then some more.
So I wanted to give someone like 225 points. I could do that?
No.
No.
No. You just circle whatever it
You
is.
just basically.
It's if it's a group that has developers and non-developers, new relationships,
125.
Yes.
and yeah.
Okay.
So this I discussed this with the members.
Because they will tell us, right?
Yes, they will
Yes.
tell us. Yeah.
There will be time for
You just have to
questions. So I'll go to the judges first for questions, and then Rosie's going to run around the room for questions as well, possibly.
Yay.
We'll see. Yeah. All right, everybody happy?
Yeah, give us the sheets.
Yes. You will need a sheet for each team. I'll leave a stack here. And a stack here.
How many teams are we talking?
Important that you write the name of the most important score. I wish to write
How many teams are there?
There are 6.
Okay. We should have enough then. Yes. If we don't, we can go online. I have nothing to do.
You ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Excellent.
I'm gonna stand here. She'll probably say something.
Yes. Oh, you. We have the camera.
In a white.
All right, we're ready to make a start. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is the. Sorry, this is. Can everybody hear me? Excellent. Right, so this is the Ideas Challenge presentation session. Hopefully everybody's aware of this and everybody's in the right place. Thank you all for coming. So I've kind of subtitled this group therapy because we didn't realize really the kind of response we would get from you when we asked you what your problems were. I think there may be some kind of pent-up, passive-aggressive, emotional thing going on inside the community that hasn't had a chance to express itself. Like, this is what we thought we would have. We'd be begging you for your problems, and kind of, this is how we ended up. Which meant Rosie, my co-chair Rosie and myself, on Tuesday morning, were kind of doing this.
But we ended up with a number of problems that didn't make it. You were all very creative, and some of you got a little bit political. But it's all good. We actually, the majority, the vast majority, and in fact 100 problems were actual problems. And we now have this list of 100 that hopefully a lot of you, even if you haven't been in teams, were looking at and thinking about. And I think that, as an outcome of this exercise, is also incredibly valuable. And I'm sure there'll be blog posts about what the community say are the problems we have at the moment for the next, 3 or 4 months. But let's talk about the teams. We have 6 entrants. Hooray! And they have named themselves fairly creatively, though not as creatively as some years. But before we get on to them, we really need to kind of calibrate the audience. We don't have like an official clapometer this year, but you do have to communicate with the judges. And the way you do that is to tell them whether you've understood the presentation, whether you've been entertained, or in fact, whether you've been inspired. So we need to let the judges hear what that sounds like. So imagine you have a presentation and it's just absolutely terrible. Like you almost fell asleep. It's unclear. You don't know why they're there, what they're doing. But we're a polite bunch. We're an inclusive group. This is group therapy. So what I would like is just some nice polite applause, please. Yeah, no, I'm right. There is some passive-aggressive stuff going on here. Okay, so you have a nice, clear, concise, well-presented presentation, and you understand the point of it. Okay, good. You have also been entertained. Nice. And now you've had one that's just, it's complete, it's changed your way of thinking. You're inspired. You're going to go out there and make this thing happen. Excellent. So we have these 6 teams. That was very good. Well done. We have these 6 teams. They're coming on in the order that they submitted. And I have to say, we had a very tense 15 minutes towards the end of the deadline. But the Yellow Bison Bears actually were in 22 hours before they had to be. And now they're complaining about going first. So, and now for something completely different. Yes, the Yellow Bison Bears, please.
You want to use your laptop? No.
Okay.
VGI. Can take this one.
Starting now?
Sure. Well, are you starting now?
No.
I'll take like 22 hours.
If you go over, you will hear this sound.
Okay, well, thanks for letting us come up here and show you our Ideas Challenge 2018 prototype. We are the yellow, actually, bison bears, to be multilingual, and we have worked on our prototype, which we don't have a creative name for yet, but you can let us know because we're going to put it in the open, the Intuitive Image Browse Search Categorizer. The challenge that you gave us was to browse and search images in a visual and intuitive way. For example, you said, I want to be able to find all photographs with a horse, a tree, or car on it in a very easy way. You said that the problem that existed was the collections we have now have subject keywords, but these are incomplete, i.e. the humans leave them empty. Various thesauri are used, but only local keywords are assigned, and the assignment of keywords is very subjective, i.e. each cataloger or person entering those keywords has their own interests. So here's what we propose.
So the technical solution involved the use of IEEF Image API to provide a fast and intuitive, powerful access to high-quality images. The IEEF Image API is also used to filter information in a machine learning, artificial intelligence that automatically identify visual pattern and assign always the same keywords to the same thing. Web annotation is used to store and show this pattern overlapping the image, and presentation API will use to put all the pieces together, and the IEEF search API will allow us to make the search and browse of our keywords over a collection.
So here's our live demo.
So, what you see here is a bison, and we run it through our artificial intelligence, and it totally understood there's a bison. So if I'm going to click here, whoa, then I'm going to see a lot of bisons, and so it's all linked up. It's tagged well. So we have some more bisons over here, for example. So there are a lot of bisons actually in Yellowstone. I was there. I made all these pictures for you, and oh. What's this? What?
Oh, there is a bison here.
Oh yeah, there's a bison.
Okay.
But what's this?
Oh, it's a bear.
Ah, the beers. Yes, of course.
Yeah,
So
okay.
I really made these pictures myself, and it was so great being in Yellowstone, so great being in Montana here with you, because I found these two cup beers, and it's really, really cute, isn't it? We have 2 minutes left, so hurry up. There was one beer coming really directly at us. But we survived, so we can be here at the challenge with you. Yes, please.
So just to show you that we were able to come up with this great idea, we were really diverse. We were 2 developers, 1 non-developer.
Developers.
Come on, please.
None of us have ever taken part in an Open Repo Ideas Challenge, and man, I had fun. We all have different native languages, which was also really fun because I had no idea what a bison was until this weekend. You want to say this first? Yeah.
So the 2 of us, we know each other, but it was a real pleasure to work with Jennifer. I didn't know her before. You did neither, so we also have new relationships. And in the end, the Ideas Challenge did not brought together people that did not know each other. It even brought together 2 competitors. We are both running these big companies, and it made a lot of fun to work together. Thank you a lot.
Thank you so much.
So we're going to go to the judges for questions.
What is it we actually saw with the black screen and the boxes and things like that?
So what you saw was an IIIF viewer that was showing the pictures we put into our artificial intelligence and the text the artificial intelligence put onto the pictures. So that's the way how we're going to present the image collection of your institution after it was after our artificial intelligence put out the keywords on it.
Thank you. I understand the theme of the conference is sustainable open repositories. What's your sustainability plan for this fake demo?
The artificial intelligence is very low food, so we don't spend money to maintain it. And it's applied to any repository technology because it's just a standard and you can use IIIF to interact with this technology at any existing platform.
And having different keywords in an image collection is really frustrating to the users. So if you want to sustain your image collection, you have to satisfy them. And that's what our solution does.
And then also we can be kinder to our catalogers so that they don't kill us for getting rid of them. But then they can do higher level things and help us with the AI.
Let's say I had an image collection that I wanted to apply this to. What do you think the timeline would be before it was functional?
I think that is quite close to be implemented. 1 month can be done.
We have time for just one quick question from the audience. Can you?
So do you have any idea of what data sets you would use to train your model, or would you use an existing AI model in order to do that?
Maybe the first week of our new company that we found will be to have a trip in Yellowstone, and we will find all the data set that we need.
Can we have another round of applause, please? I have to see who's number 2. Is it Team Pow? Can we have Team Pow on the stage, please?
Sure. Alrighty, I'm Liz, this is Terry, we just met yesterday. We have a third team member who is Torsten, who I knew before, but I don't think you knew? He had to get on a plane, so he's not here. But we are Team POW, because our project is called Provisioning Open Source Workspaces. So one of the big challenges that, that came up in some of the suggestions was about getting new developers involved in open source projects. So that's a big challenge that we can't exactly solve altogether just now, but we can tackle a small piece of that challenge. So this is the challenge in that setting up your development environment can be really, really hard. When you are trying to get started learning learning how to develop in a new piece of software, there are a lot of steps that can trip you up. You have to download and install a bazillion prereqs, complete a whole bunch of configuration steps in a very specific order, otherwise it won't work at all. And then sometimes it just does not work after you've done all of those steps listed in the README file. I have no idea why, it just doesn't work. So you can go through that process a few times, or maybe you just give up. This comes up a lot if you are in the business of teaching technical workshops, where you have put together diligently a really nice schedule for your workshop. You've written documentation that tells your participants step by step how to set up the thing that you are going to do the workshop on. And about an hour later, it all goes downhill because everybody is stuck trying to download and install the software and get everything set up. So by the end of the workshop, you might have, a third of the participants that are working along through your finely crafted tutorial while you are still trying to help the handful of students who haven't given up and left, who still can't get their development environment working. So our idea is fully provisioned development environments that can be started in a browser at the click of a button in any operating system without installing any software. And Terry will tell you more about how that works.
All right, so the participant in your workshop will come to the landing page, read about what's happening, click Get Started, and then a fully functioning environment will appear. There is at least one commercial solution that does a lot of this, so there's probably others. In this window you see code directory and links to Git in the upper left. Upper right is a IDE that runs within the browser. Lower left is a set of Docker images running your repository software. Lower right is terminal output. All of that available just in the single browser. Thank you.
Oh, and as far as diversity goes, aside from not knowing each other, we have 2 developers, 1 non-developer. Torsten's first language is non-English, but he does pretty well with, with it.
And for first-time participants?
Oh yeah, are we all first-time? Yes, first-time Ideas Challenge participants.
Do we have questions from the judges?
You said it was going to be centrally supported and funded. Where's that coming from?
That's what we need your help with, is someone who maybe can't devote resources. Maybe they could donate money. Let the projects, the central resources with the projects, dole these out at appropriate occasions to be used.
Any other judges' questions? Do you have any questions from the floor? Okay, can we have a very finely calibrated round of applause, please? Oh, I'm getting my exercise today. Okay, can we have Team Fix It on the stage, please?
All right, so we are Team Fix It. I'm Josh Westgard from 50% of Team Fix It from Josh Westgard from University of Maryland, and I have Julian Morley from Stanford University here. We just met yesterday, and our other team members who couldn't be here because they both left are Don Brower and Aaron Birkland.
It's important to note they didn't leave because they knew about this. They left for other reasons.
So the challenge, in full disclosure, I have to admit that this was my own challenge that I came up with a solution for by attending the OCFL session. So this was the challenge. I'm not going to read it, but basically it's that Fedora offers you the endpoint to build a fixity service, but doesn't provide a fixity service with, out of the box. So there are some complications to this. This is essentially how fixity works right now. You have FCR fixity endpoint, and you receive back a success or failure message when you hit that endpoint about whether your asset has been checked and is fixed. This is limited in that it puts a burden on the client, puts a lot of burden on the client, and we think that Fedora should have as a core value providing a fixity service itself. And it probably, this is not a criticism of Fedora, but it does probably make sense because Fedora is primarily the API, and persistence fixity might not be something that you necessarily do with an API. Okay, so the proposed solution, fixity using the external content feature of Fedora, stored in the Oxford Common File layout, can be stored as external content. You have OCFL validation tools, which are not in existence yet, but are forthcoming and planned. And we have the APIX extension, which would allow us to access those tools, trigger those tools, and this would be completely transparent to the user of the API. So no existing fixity services would have to change, because with APIX you could intercept the request and give a response exactly as it currently exists. The one thing we would think would be useful to add is a configurable fixity module, which could be part of the core Fedora code that would allow you to then configure regular checks using the OCFL validation tools on your content. Thank you.
Do we have any questions from the judges? How diverse are you as a team?
Well, one of us doesn't wear glasses.
I actually don't.
Julian, have you been in a challenge before? I know you are a challenge. He's been giving it to me all week.
This is my first challenge, aside from you.
This is also my first challenge. I believe Aaron Birkland has been in the challenge before. He was on our team.
Do you have developers and non-developers?
I'm not a developer.
Are you? I own the Selection Holiday Inn Express one.
Don is not, I think, strictly speaking, a developer. It's not his title anyway. Aaron Birkland would be a developer.
And how about working before together?
I know Aaron from Fedora community. I've met Don at a conference, but we've never worked together.
Okay, cool.
I just met Julian yesterday.
Is that everything? Is everybody English speaking?
Indeed, yes.
Any other questions?
What is fixity?
Ensuring that the file hasn't changed. Yeah.
Usually referring to external checks. Usually you do it by checking the file against the checksum that you computed ahead of time.
Are there any questions? Oh.
How close is this to implementation? Like time, people, development?
So this is where things get a little strange, because at Stanford, one of the teams that I've been working with has been implementing fixity checking for Moab. So we've already done a lot of this work for Moab in Ruby, and I've also been doing some of this work for Moab in Bash. And we plan to do this again for OCFL anyway. So we've come at this problem 3 different ways, partially. So we're going to be doing it anyway. Whether or not how we would add on the fixity for Fedora is really the only thing that we'd have to resolve.
So my thinking on this was that APIX exists. Fedora already has an external content model that's fully supported. The only piece here that's really missing, I mean, OCFL isn't official yet, but you could use Moab for this. And you could use validation tools that exist in Moab. So the only piece that is missing is this configurable fixity module. We have something like that already in place that doesn't obviously use the external content. It's just an internal Fedora checker. But I think it's very close. You could almost very quickly do this with the existing software. Yeah.
Do we have any questions from the floor? Okay, can we have a round of applause, please? And next up is the GDPR Wranglers versus Sheriffs.
Good afternoon, teams and everyone else. It was my question, and I've been traumatized in the last month. Every time I say the word GDPR, people either attack me, run away, laugh at me, or just look puzzled. So I started asking a JISC person about GDPR, and he said, speak to me at a beer. So I put the question up, and so I'm Janet McDougall from the Australian Data Archive. I'm not a developer. Saskia van Bergen, she's from Netherlands, and she's a project manager. We have Hardy, who's a developer, and Harish, who had to leave. So diversity plot, we have several languages. We've never met before. We just, by osmosis, got together. This is my question that was on the little bit of card. As an archivist, I'd like to understand the impact of the GDPR, but it's hard because no one knows how it will or will not affect research data consent relating to participants. So our idea is to build an interactive decision tool to guide users through the General Data Protection Regulations, GDPR, for those who never knew, in relation to data holdings in open repository space. And talking of funding or support, after attending a GESC workshop, I felt this would fit really well in their space.
So first, we had to find out what the real question was, and because apparently, for a lot of data managers, they think that GDPR is too complex to deal with, and they don't know where to start. They think it's very intimidating, and really, you can ask yourself, do they really need to read and understand the GDPR themselves? So we thought the solution might be threefold. There is a small part of technique, but that's really not everything, and Harry will tell you more about that part. There is a part workflow, because all the information is already online. It's just difficult to find it and difficult to understand. So we thought it would be good to help the data manager to make a start and to know which steps that have to be taken. And the third part is communication. So maybe it would be very helpful if you could help the data manager to find out who the stakeholders are and how to involve them and really start the conversation. And that way, maybe we can create a tool that lowers the barriers for data managers to start with GDPR and really make their life a little bit easier.
Okay, we have a demo. We went out and found an example that's close to what we had in mind. It is, I wonder if I can find it on this computer. Let's exit this. It's been a long time since I've used them.
While Hardy's getting the decision tool together, the point being is that we would need experts, like privacy officers in the field, to guide the tech side of our decision tool and bring all of the stakeholders together so it would be an authenticated tool. Quick, Hardy.
Oh. Okay, so this is just a rough idea, and this website was put up to help small businesses navigate the GDPR compliance. What's the right word? Mire. And it's pretty simple, and this is just a checklist. So it's just asking you if you have thought about these things. There's no decision making at the end of it. If you check all the boxes, it doesn't say congratulations, you don't have to worry. I think probably, I should have said up in the beginning, I'm not a lawyer, nor am I this is my disclaimer, nor am I an information security specialist. And there's a disclaimer at the bottom of this form as well.
But we want to have interactive, so there's output, and then you can have an idea of where to go. So it's not just dead in the water. You get the regulations you need to face.
Thank you very much. Questions from the panel?
Hi, where do you think this would fit in within the research data lifecycle? Do you imagine this at the beginning, or where would you want people to use this?
Well, it could be, I mean, a lot of things are just tack on at the end because it's too late. But obviously with new data, you would anticipate this when you're thinking about, the tool would let you flow through a decision making. The way I thought about it was Creative Commons, how it helps you choose a license. So, but this would be much more extended, and back end would have been decisions supported by the GDPR themselves. We have it certified by them to say, yes, this, you know, this is the dream. So that in the beginning you could know what data, does it have human participants, does it, is it commercial, is it academic, is it, what else is data? Is it machine created? You know, so you actually have these options, and the tool leads you to where the regulations matter to you. So if it means that there's no risk, the tool will say, well, there's no relationship to the regulations for you to worry about.
Okay, let's say JISC isn't interested in this. What's the plan for making it happen?
Well, I mean, what we can see is all the institutions all over the world, everyone's got the same issue, and they're all just pottering away in their own little worlds, doing the same sort of stuff badly. So, maybe a place like this would get funders together thinking, you know what, this is a problem we all face. Let's join in together. We could meet in Singapore.
Are there any questions from the floor? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, team OCFL. The Unicode Sparkle team are very eager.
Wait your turn, guys. Come on.
No, this is my first.
I don't know this man. Okay, so we are presenting an idea about the Oxford Common File layout, and we had some specific challenges we were trying to address. I would like to manage large data, but large data is hard to manage. I would like to have a clear understanding of needs and requirements, but those are not always clear. So that sounds like a good challenge to me. And specifically, the types of challenges, the challenges that we're trying to work on with this initiative are that, you know, that files are the heart of your repository. Yes. And databases are files too. Everybody uses databases, everybody uses files. Everybody's doing it in different ways. Some are relying on the software solutions to do it for them. Others are building your own homegrown way of doing it. This makes common tooling for working together with digital content storage really, really difficult. So our challenge and our idea is to work on the Oxford Common File layout. Our working definition for this is it's an application-independent specification that describes the storage of OCFL objects in a structured, transparent, and predictable manner, which might actually help you, what might actually help you understand that is that it's effectively a spec for archival information packages. So we're trying to standardize that OAIS concept. What is an OCFL object in our specification? It's a group of one or more bit streams and their administrative information that together have a URI or identifier. Any object may contain a sequence of versions of the bit streams that together represent an intellectual endeavor. So here we're talking about the bit streams and their history and their changes and everything that goes along with managing digital content. The goals for our initiative are to be application independent, so, everybody can use it regardless of the software. That repositories can be rebuilt or migrated from files on disk. One of my personal visions for this is to grab a disk out of the rubble of the apocalypse and plug it in and be able to get my digital content back. I don't know how feasible that is, but it sounds cool, doesn't it? And it works for traditional file storage, so spinny disks and cloud object storage, which I know it's what everybody's using these days. Two main parts. The first part, and I think this is part of the biggest challenge of getting up here, is I have to try to make files and folders and JSON sexy. So bear with me for a second. File layout, so we have a defined structure for these objects that sit on your disk. And the second bit is a little bit of JSON that tells you how to assemble those in a way that makes sense. With a roadmap, so we have a roadmap for our initiative. We're trying to get the broadest feedback from everybody, so everybody in this room can talk to us and come and contribute. We're trying to write and refine a specification, which is a challenge in itself, creating our test cases and developing a validator so that we can verify that we're doing the right thing. So, how'd we do? Challenges, managing distributed data. We've got all of these sorted out, I think, so our job is done. Thank you very much.
Questions from the panel? Ah, yes, diversity.
We are not diverse.
You're all the same?
We're all the same.
Yes. Well, yeah, I was going to say.
So I have data that's really unique and special and doesn't fit into your system. What are you going to do about that? How are you going to make the system fit my different and unique needs?
By soliciting broad feedback, so if you have something that you want to tell us, now's the time to tell us.
And it's also worth pointing out that OCFL is supposed to accept any bit stream. So if it's digital content that you can write to disk in any way, shape, or form, then an OCFL object should be able to take it.
Any other questions? From the floor, any questions? Oh.
I missed the sexy part.
So did we. What?
So wait, what was wrong with regular file systems? I mean, that's worked for 50 years?
Not a file system, a file layout. So it's not like XFS or ZFS or anything like that. It's a way of structuring files and folders in a sensible way so that you can write things on top of that that have an expected structure. Does that make any sense?
And it also can be a flat object store?
Yes. Come talk to me later.
Any other questions? Oh, good. There's one close by.
So I believe in this project, and I guess I'm wondering if you've thought about how you're going to survive the apocalypse to test your post-apocalyptic hard drive restoration scenario.
I have a bunker.
Have you considered making this an extension to the Baggett spec?
We have considered it. We're looking at how to bring those two things together. One of the things Baggett doesn't do is do versioning, so we're trying to sort of square that circle about how do you do versioning, Baggett, Moab, all of these things that are broadly in use already.
And this work is sort of based off, inspired by Mob, which in turn was based off and inspired by Baggett. So it's an evolution of an evolution.
Have you considered raising awareness of the project with a Burst from the Rubble T-shirt and other swag with the fists coming through the rubble with the disk drive?
We have now.
Okay, can we have a round of applause, please? That's my laptop. Don't walk away with it, please. And finally, Team Unicode Sparkle.
Okay, hello. We are Team Unicode Sparkle, and we have hats and we have a logo, so we like prizes. So our team, we're quite a large team. It's quite diverse. It's my first challenge, my first ideas challenge.
Mine too.
And I think some of the others, it was their first as well. We have a couple of developers. We have some managers. We have librarians. I think Ben was a librarian, is he? Yeah. So I know my teammates well.
We can't count.
Yes, we can't count because I think there might have been some mention of a maximum number of team members. Shh. We didn't have to mention that. Okay, so what other, oh, language, yes.
I don't speak mods.
He does speak Italian, however, and Dermot speaks Irish. He's bilingual. We'll give you bilingual, right? So we do have some language diversity as well. And I knew Dermot before, but I didn't really know anybody else. And I think some of the other people knew each other, but didn't know everyone else. And we all met on Tuesday night. Yay! We met on a night this week. Okay, so our problem. As a developer, I would like to translate mods XML into anything. But it's hard because we don't want to lose data and we want to get it all back. So this is one of the challenges that was presented. And the great thing about our communities is that whenever you have some sort of a challenge or some sort of a problem that you're facing, there's usually other people out there who have faced or are facing the same challenges. So what we did when we talked about this, we discovered that actually, well, there's a lot of stuff going on in this area. There's a lot of people who are already doing something like this. And it's not necessarily a technical problem. What it is, it's a communication problem. So we thought we would start off by gathering together a directory of all the initiatives that are working on mods translations, mods transformations, and generally mods to RDF, but also mods to any other useful format that people might want to do. So we started creating a directory of tools, tips, techniques, and workflows and so on that people were already working on. And we actually, a lot of the stuff came out of things that people had seen at sessions, mentioned at sessions at OR. So a lot of the stuff over the course of this week, several people have presented things about what they're doing with mods and turning mods into RDF or doing various different things with mods. So we thought that was a great starting point to take stuff coming from the event and then also try to find other resources out there. So we have a slide of some of the example tools and techniques that we found, but we have a document elsewhere where we're actually collating the full, 2 minutes. We're collating the full directory. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but if you want to see these ones and a lot more, you can visit our document, which I'll give you the link for in a moment. My horn is falling off. So it's, as I said, it's not really a technical problem, but we do have a development component in this project because we have a number of developers. So what we thought would be a really useful tool would be to use APIX to have service endpoints that basically could transform mods either coming in or going out of the repository. And you could get it, you could request to have a resource that's not in mods, but have it given back to you in mods. Or when you're uploading mods to the repository, it could be transformed into different formats. So these are our proposed development pieces of work. And we also thought that this is something the whole idea of the communication and getting together directories of of initiatives that people are doing. This goes way beyond mods. And one example that also came up this weekend was the metadata zoo. So people have been busy kind of collating acronyms related to our industries and putting in definitions and extra information about those. So I wanted to give a shout out to that because it's a similar kind of idea. We want to all try and get this knowledge together and communicate better and make sure that everybody knows what everybody else is doing. And we want to propose that we find a permanent home for all of this knowledge. So there's a lot of knowledge out there. Let's do more of these kind of things where we crowdsource some information and let's put them on a wiki and host it somewhere. Maybe one of the organizations in this room would be able to host that wiki. Also, we're an open source project, Unicode Sparkle, and you too can join us. This is the URL where you find our lovely directory of mods, tools, and I think that's all we have to say, so yay.
Any questions from the judges?
Can we see it? Does it really exist? Oh.
But I don't know do you know?
I think that it's not publicly open.
Was it only invitations?
Sorry.
I mean, it does exist. It does exist. Do you have permission to change sharing on it? Okay, Bethany set it up, so Bethany has permission and she's already left, so I can't fix it. I'm so sorry.
I really understand. Rosie and I have been having this problem all week.
So I had high hopes for this group based on the name, since I like Sparkle. Can you confirm no actual Unicodes or Sparkles were involved?
So we're kind of riding on our brand to sell this product and get us prizes. You know, the brand is not necessarily related to the particular product or problem that we're tackling. It's just one of a suite of problems that we deal with.
Okay, so thinking about sustainability in a project like this is exciting. You put together a directory. It is true more or less for today. What's the plan to, right, every time someone updates it, they're going to find your wiki, and how is that going to work?
Yeah, the plan is to put it in a wiki and make it available for who wants to collaborate. So teach them to fish and give them the bait. So this is the bait. You know, it's a collaborative and ongoing project.
Any further questions from the judges? I'll open up to the floor. Any questions? Wait, you're on another team.
Did you consider making this an awesome list?
We did not, but we will now.
Good. Yay.
Any other questions? Okay, can I hear the final perfectly calibrated round of applause of the night? Okay, so we're about 3 minutes early for coffee, but they've been kind of bringing it out early all week, so you may have coffee there already. But that's the end of the session. We'll be announcing the winners in the session after coffee. Thank you very much.
I was going to switch us back, but I think if you're okay, I'll just.
Hello, friends.
Oh, damn! I thought I made it really clear with our strategic planning discussion where we talked about the synergies between.
With the theme. My vision is sustainable because I am the administrator and my mind never changes. Yeah, I'm gonna make you write the grant, but I'm gonna be the PI on it, and it's gonna cost you more time and energy than it would cost for me to just pay for it out of pocket. Rosie would be on our team though. What? Yeah, come here. So because I don't have a dongle and I don't just want to put my computer up here, I literally copied the entire URL over to this browser, and then I got server knocked out. So now I have to sit through and figure out where I'm.
Are you on the wireless here?
Yes.
Can you just make a bit.ly real quick?
Yes. That's what I was originally, but I didn't want to do it for faster. It's always faster to create it. access to the document. I'll send it to you on Slack.
Hi, how are you doing? I'm great. Yeah. This is totally my normal voice. Yes. Hi. I'm trying to get the slides up. She's working on it for me. Go Karen, go Karen, go Karen, go.
I know, right? Those are flu bugs. Are you familiar with flu bug? Okay, the next time we are in the United States and we are in a different city that actually would have a shop, I will take you. Or Karen can take you, because it's more likely you'll see her because you're going to AAA. If you had been in DC, she could have taken you. And actually, when you were at the diversity meeting and you were in Minneapolis, I was actually telling Mark I've never been to Minneapolis before. Oh. So if I invite you to come to Chicago for something, because we have a shop in Chicago, the whole reason would just be to go shopping. Oh no. Okay, maybe we try a different browser. Tech support? Can we have some tech support?
We disconnected from the wireless. Where were we before? Were we on guest?
Hey, we need to get access to the interwebs. Should we just be on the guest network? It's your machine. It's your machine.
Okay. I just got it. I just got it. So oh, fine. Don't support my Firefox.
Because it's old.
Okay, there you go. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah,
So, I did.
So are you
Has it really been that long? Yeah, we're good, thanks.
Okay.
Okay, let me ask you your opinion. So Asaf is already plugged in. Kind of would rather have not have to go back and forth.
Yeah.
Since the slide is basically just.
Yeah. Just introduce it.
Yeah, so I was thinking that I would just read the thing.
Yeah.
So I'll just come up with my computer, read the thing, or just open this up and read the thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And then we go to.
And then we can actually just hide that one.
Yeah. And then, so, Elena's going to do the posters. Having raised the idea challenge. So Elena's going to do the sponsors. So maybe we should move the sponsors first.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have to do this here because it's all the same document.
Yeah. And then she does the posters. They do that. Oh, she wants to thank us as well.
She does?
Yeah.
Okay. Does she want to thank us or does Sarah want to thank us?
I don't know. They need to decide who's going to thank her.
Layla?
okay, so I've moved the sponsors to be next to the posters. So straight after, we thank the sponsors, then we do the posters, then we do the ideas challenge, and then we're getting on to the next thank you. So first of all, it's us and the steering committee, and then we do the program committee. So you get, so then we split them up from the posters which we've used. So if you wanted to do the sponsors and the posters, then Sarah could come up after the idea challenge. You can swap around with the order of the slides. Yeah.
Did you just copy that one? Or was that one already copied?
And we put these to it, so that can, so we can always just get rid of these two. Oh no, because you want to read that.
Yes. I want to read that for now. And then I will take a microphone for questions. Yes. And the other one is next to Rachel.
Okay, so we can just split the room.
So Karen made a bit.ly for it. It was like, do you remember what the bit.ly was? It was like OR 2018 -closing. Yes.
Hyphen closing.
Okay. Sorry, presentation. I was going to my goddaughter's elementary school graduation.
Mick. Yes, we did it for you. It's just the placeholder. You delete it. Do whatever. Hello. Hello. I'm going to steal this so that Claire has it so that the two of us can run around and ask when there's Q&A. Okay.
Who's going to announce the winner of the ideas challenge?
Rosie and Adam.
Why don't we do something like the Oscars and the winner is La La Land? So do you remember that they announced La La Land as a winner and then actually
Instead of
the
Moonlight.
winner? And so they had to say, oh no, we didn't win, sorry, after they got the Oscars.
Nice. Yeah. Tell Adam.
Adam.
Yeah.
Good. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's good. I like it. All right. I'm just curious simple stuff. Great.
That's fine. Everybody gets a prize.
I've been known to pick up people's phones, so. I did it actually in a meeting. I picked up some of these keys, carried them with me, put them on my desk, and then like came into my bag, like went to the bathroom, came back and was like, who was in my office? They left keys. No, I stole them.
I'm also going to comment on the fact that Asaf did a workshop for us, 2 workshops for us, and I have never in my entire career seen a keynote do that for us.
Yeah, and also he set up that collaboration thing.
Yeah, I think so. We're just gonna. Yeah.
Almost forgot. I had a last-minute change of title. Is that okay?
Yeah. What should I call it?
So the talk is now called Free Culture at the Periphery. As it turned out, it's a slightly more apt title for what I'm actually going to talk about. A better connection to the kind of two halves of my talk about my own digital library and the Wikimedia work in the developing world.
Perfect.
Yeah, Free Culture at the Periphery.
Great.
All right, thanks.
The free culture or free culture?
No, Free Culture.
Great. Okay. Should have repopulated up there.
And if we go down. So this is Layla.
Sarah or yeah.
And then
this is us.
and then
They listen to me.
so we've got us. Yeah. Do you want to thank the program committee?
Yeah.
I take it then we thank you. Is Layla gonna
I think
thank you?
Layla and I were talking about not Layla, we decided not to thank us publicly. Here, give me the okay.
That's, we're just gonna thank you.
Okay.
Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, that's totally
So
fine.
then after you thank the program committee,
I think we should say points.
Is everybody here? Can everyone take their seats? Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to invite you to our closing keynote. Asaf Bartov is a senior program officer at the Wikimedia Foundation, the nonprofit operating Wikipedia around the world. His work focuses on capacity building with emerging volunteer communities all over the world, with particular emphasis on India, Sub-Saharan Africa, Brazil, and Eastern Europe. While his academic background is in Greek and Latin language and literature, he has a strong professional background in software development and an abiding volunteer interest in digital libraries. He is the founder, chief technologist, and chief editor of Project Ben Yehuda, an award-winning volunteer-run digital library of public domain Hebrew works. He is also a structured and linked data enthusiast and previously served as an invited expert on the W3C's Library Linked Data Incubator Group. He frequently teaches introductory classes on Wikidata, the Wikimedia Foundation's Linked Open Data Project, and on querying Wikidata with the Sparkle language. Asaf's talk is titled Free Culture at the Periphery. The Wikimedia movement, I'm going to actually skip that because he's just going to talk about his talk. We don't need to go through that. But on a more personal note, I really want to thank you so much for teaching us 2 workshops on Monday, for staying for the entire conference, because I can tell you, in my entire career, I have never heard of a keynote staying for an entire conference. For jumping into our community and creating a collaboration document for us. I sincerely hope that you feel welcomed by our community, because it's really been a true pleasure and a true honor having you join us this week. So thank you. With that, Asaf.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I stayed because this is interesting stuff, not out of politeness. And while I set up, I'm curious about the results. Were they announced? I mean, the suspense is killing me. All right. Okay. So let me set up here real quick. In the meantime, you can admire. Yeah. I'd like to be able to see you. Yes, absolutely. You can admire my friend Alkes, the Wikidata Moose. He's traveling the world with me, teaching Wikidata wherever he goes. And he will be supervising this keynote. There we go. He is also a member of the Wikimedia Cuteness Association, a group of dedicated plush toys traveling the world and spreading free knowledge wherever they go. All right. So thank you, Aviva, for the introduction. Thank you to the program committee for inviting me. It is a pleasure to be here. And I am an outsider to this community. I'm not a library professional, repository professional. I am a professional technologist, but I'm on hiatus from that profession for the last 6 years, 7 years. I've been working for the Wikimedia Foundation. That is the nonprofit that operates Wikipedia around the world, where my job does not involve programming. So that has become a hobby. And so I chose to title my talk, Free Culture at the Periphery, a Personal Perspective, because I feel that is both all I can give you, but also what I want to give you. I'm trying to make good on the implicit promise in the 2 main hats under which I was invited, those of a free culture activist and that of a Wikimedia professional working with a lot of communities around the world. So there is going to be a segue that I tried to make not too awkward in the middle of the talk. See if you can spot it. So is this working? Almost. Okay. Yeah, so I'm pleased to meet you. A few words about me, in addition to what was already said, is I'm a native Hebrew speaker. Do I get points for diversity for that? And I've been a volunteer with Wikipedia since 2001. That's the year Wikipedia was founded in English. So it's been a while. And I still am a Wikipedia volunteer, writing articles, editing the wiki in my spare time. But I'm also, I've also turned Wikimedia work into my day job 7 years ago, working for the foundation, where, like I said, I'm a program officer working with our volunteer communities. I'm not paid to edit Wikipedia on the job. I'm also an accidental digital librarian, which is what makes this conference interesting for me. And I founded several nonprofits. I develop free software for fun, not so much for profit. And I'm a lapsed classicist, as was mentioned. This has nothing to do with anything. I'm just guilting myself by reminding myself of it. So I do want to say a few words about how I got here, considering I'm not a library professional. And it starts with this man, Michael S. Hart, founder of Project Gutenberg. I trust you've all heard of Project Gutenberg. If you haven't, it's a project creating and sharing e-texts, digital files containing texts, started in 1971 on room-sized computers and on stolen computer time. But this man had the vision of using computers for sharing texts just because we can, because computers can do that very easily. Even in the 70s, it wasn't too hard to transmit some text over the network, such as it was. And he collected around him a group of volunteers who responded to and shared that vision. And all this was happening in the faraway United States. I mean, in this here United States, but I was in Israel at the time, far away. And they've been at it for years, much accelerating with the late 80s and the early BitNet internet networks. And through releasing those texts to the public and some unknown magic, a CD-ROM in 1991, do you remember those? A CD-ROM arrived at my house with a friend who said, "You've got to see this. You're not going to believe what's on this CD-ROM." And that was a third-party CD-ROM. I'm pretty certain Michael Hart didn't even know this thing exists. It's some entrepreneur took a whole bunch of texts from Project Gutenberg, put them on a CD, and sold them for $2. And my friend somehow got a hold of one of those CD-ROMs, and we put it into the computer, and that changed my life. That CD-ROM is how I, a teenager in Israel before the internet, the public internet, got access to the complete works of Shakespeare, Milton, Lewis Carroll, to translations of Plato, the Victorian era translations by Benjamin Jowett, Aristotle, Confucius, Galen, Voltaire, etc., etc. It was endless, and it was mine. It was in my computer, and I could read it anytime I wanted. Now, some of these texts have been translated into Hebrew. Some of them were available in the university library, not so much in my hometown library, not so much reachable, accessible to teenage Israeli me. So that CD-ROM has made me a free culture activist because I did read the fine print. I did find out where these texts came from and understood that it wasn't the guy who sold my friend the CD for $2. It was a bunch of volunteers who were producing these texts. So I was a happy user, a happy beneficiary of Project Gutenberg for years, first through this CD and then later, of course, online. Fast forward to, Michael Hart died in 2011. I do want to dedicate this to his memory. So fast forward to the story of my digital project, the Project Ben Yehuda. It starts as all good stories start. A long time ago, in a galaxy far away, far, far away, in 1999, which I would like to remind you is before Wikipedia. Some of us are old enough to remember a time before Wikipedia. So yeah, that was before Wikipedia. I made some stone soup. I trust everybody knows the fable of the stone soup, right? The vagrant who rolls into town, is desperately hungry, asks for food, nobody would give him any. He ends up setting up in the town square with an old pot and some water and a big stone in the middle of the pot. And people are curious and ask him, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm making stone soup." Everybody's curious. "How does that work?" And he says, "Well, it's really tasty, you should try it, but it's even better with a carrot," you know, and then someone volunteers to add a carrot, and another person adds an onion, etc., etc. Delicious soup is had by all. So I made some stone soup in 1999. Actually, I did it again yesterday. You may have participated. If you have, I thank you. You've really helped put this slide together. But also, I hope you've felt you were genuinely creating a valuable thing for our colleagues, especially those who are too shy to ask. So that's how stone soups work. You start with almost nothing, but you invite other people to join you, and amazing things happen. Yay, collaboration. So in 1999, the need I had was not the alphabet soup. The need I had was to quote poetry at work, which is one of my needs. I don't know about you. But I found myself wanting to quote some famous lines by our national poet, a guy named Bialik. And the problem is I don't actually remember them well enough. I mean, I know the ones I mean. I know the lines. I know most of those lines, but I don't want to misquote. And strangely enough, I don't go to work every day carrying my Bialik with me. So the moment when it was apt to quote Bialik at one of my unsuspecting colleagues was gone before I could actually get the text. Of course, that night, I went back to my bookshelf, got the Bialik, copied out the lines, came back triumphantly to work the next day and said, hey, remember that thing with the thing? So these are the lines that are so, and the guy is like, what? Yeah, so the moment was gone. This is a true story. This is the itch that I scratched when I started my digital library. I wanted to be able to quote poetry at work. And I was upset that English speakers have Shakespeare and Milton and Lewis Carroll and everyone at their fingertips to quote at work or read during boring meetings. And I don't. And there's like nothing. There's just nothing in Hebrew online at the time, 1999. So I remembered my old friend, Michael S. Hart, and realized that is why these English texts exist online and are widely mirrored, of course. So I decided to do something about it. And I started my stone soup. That night, the second night, I sat down at my computer and started typing Bialik's poetry into a text file. On the way, I learned that I don't actually know how to add the Hebrew diacritical marks, nikud, which are absolutely essential for poetry in Hebrew. Until that time, I had never had a need to use diacritics in business communication, so I had to teach myself that and a whole bunch of other things. But I did it, and I started typing poems by Bialik. I put the first batch online, and at the bottom I said, hey, so I'm putting up these poems online. If you think it's a good idea and want to help, shoot me an email, and we can divvy up the work or something. That was it. That was the stone in the soup. This is what it looks like today. For the Hebrew challenged among you, I will promise you this is a homepage of a digital library with some notable authors there. My friend Bialik is second from the right there. And I will give you some numbers that I cannot actually see from this angle. Yeah, so we have today, fast forward to 2018, we have published over 11,000 works. By 200 authors, thanks to about 1,000 volunteers over the years, with a kind of consistent pool of about 150 to 200 volunteers actively typing or proofreading something right now as we speak. We have about 1 million views per month. It may sound a lot, it may not sound a lot. I remind you there are about 7 million Hebrew speakers on this planet. 7 million total speakers and about 5 million kind of native level speakers is the statistic I just looked up. And a little bit of tech, since this is a partially technical audience. Some of you will be happy to hear the technology is Ruby on Rails. We use multi-markdown. It's a dialect of Markdown. Most people know Markdown, maybe you don't know multi-markdown. That's one of the dialects that has something very important to us, which is footnotes. Standard Markdown doesn't have footnotes. A lot of the texts we publish have footnotes. Historical works have hundreds of footnotes. So that was essential for us. So we store the texts internally as multi-markdown, from which we can, of course, generate HTML, PDF, whatever, EPUBs, anything people want. And we're hosted on the Amazon cloud. After the first few years, we were hosted on some university servers in Israel. And the rest of our code is basically homebrewed. We have our own content system, our own transcription system for volunteers, and even our own task management system, which is kind of like an issue tracker, except usable by people with low computer literacy who make up a good chunk of our volunteer base, actually. So I couldn't throw, I don't know, Jira or Bugzilla at those people and say, yeah, let's just manage our work this way. So we wrote our own, nice and simple. We even have the beginnings of a Ferberish catalog, and I'll get to that in just a moment. This is where you go, aw. This is our youngest volunteer actively scanning a book, as you can see. So we scan books and then we deliver those scans over the internet to our volunteers to type and proofread. This young gentleman is about 7 when this photo was taken. He calls me uncle, but yeah, he's our youngest volunteer. So I want to share with you 5 accidents that have happened throughout the 19 years this project has been in existence. And these are things that I think would be interesting to you. The first is what I call accidental authority. So I discovered, that a lot of people will use resources from Project Ben Yehuda, like George Mallory climbing the Everest, because it's there. It's there, it's online, so we use it. That's as far as the calculation goes. Questions of authority, questions of provenance are not high on most users' mental arithmetic. It's there, I found it, Google led me right to it, that's it, I'm using it. If it's not online, if it's paywalled, not making it into my paper. I'm generalizing, it doesn't have to be a paper. And maybe this is more typical of undergrads than of tenured researchers, but by and large, the logic holds. There is a tremendous chilling effect the moment you put any kind of obstacle in front of a resource. Doesn't matter if in the end it's available to me for free. If I have to register, if I have to go through some authorization screen, any kind of interference, and those of you looking at analytics can readily convince yourselves of this by looking at the numbers. Any intermediary you put between people and a resource funnels off some of your potential users. Interestingly, decisions made by volunteers are determining, to some extent, the shape of research, at least the shape of what a lot of literature undergrads will and will not write about. If my volunteers happened to have already gotten to digitizing author X, but not author Y, there's actually a larger chance author X will be studied and written about. Literature professors in Tel Aviv tell me their students look at them funny when they ask them to go to the library. Like physically, like actually, like get up and walk to a building. And you know, the extreme of that range actually responds with indignation. With like, how could you be asking us to do this? Why can't you provide a PDF or, you know, a link?
Such are the times. So this is a complete accident to me. I did not set out to affect the shape of research. I just wanted to quote poetry at work, remember? But this is happening. And another aspect of accidental authority is that we, amateurs, none of us is a literature professor or anything of the kind, get asked expert questions all the time. Why? Because we publish the text. We put it online, so obviously we are the people to ask. That logic never made sense to me, but it makes sense to a lot of people. We get the strangest queries from school children asking us to effectively do their homework for them, to tenured professors writing to us as fellow scholars, asking questions about certain texts or first publications or all kinds of things. And we answer all of them as a matter of policy, but we make it clear, you know, what we do and what we don't do and what our credentials aren't. And very often, dare I say it, refer them to the library. But again, I was surprised, I've gotten used to it, but I was surprised by the kinds of questions people refer to me with absolute confidence. And if I were to respond to those questions, you know, substantively without mentioning that I'm just a volunteer, I'm just a guy from the internet, they would have taken my responses as authoritative. Even though in no place do I list myself as any kind of scholar on anything to do with Hebrew literature, just because I'm on the other end of the email address at the bottom of the site. Yeah, and this holds true even though, of course, our work does contain typos and omissions and mistakes despite our best efforts. Of course, being digital, we fix those mistakes as soon as we encounter them, but you know, statistically, the texts have mistakes in them, and what we have found is that for the majority of people, the urgent need not to get up off their chair trumps the risk of some typos. So people use it anyway, even though there's no guarantee the text is in any way authoritative. The second accident I want to share with you is an accidental canon, not this one. Nope, not this one. There we go. The canon. So I lied when I said my classics background had nothing to do with it. Here's some ancient Greek for you. Canon comes from, you know this guy from my big fat Greek wedding? Give me any word, I show you how it comes from Greek. I'm that guy, except more annoying. Because actually canon does come from the Greek kanon, but that in turn comes from Hebrew, from the Hebrew kaneh, which means reed, right? Like the Sea of Reeds. And that is what a canon, a measuring stick, was originally made of, right? A reed that you use to measure. Yeah. So, yes, so the accidental canon. The library we're building strives to be comprehensive, not canonical. We're not a best of. We're not a Giants of Hebrew Literature collection. We are a library, like an academic library, ideally like a national library, like an intergalactic library. We want all the Hebrew texts, all of them, even the really terrible ones, even the horrible Vogon poetry level poetry. And there is a bunch of that. Even the misogynistic ones, even the fascist ones. We want all the texts in Hebrew because we're a library. We're not a gallery of the best of Hebrew literature. However, by the way, and we're maybe 10% of the way, right, to covering everything ever published in Hebrew, maybe. But having published enough of what is considered intuitively by people to be the Hebrew canon, the rest of the canon is assumed. And people clamor for the missing parts of the canon. Now, we publish public domain texts. There are some canonical Hebrew poets from the middle 20th century who did not have the good sense to die on time and are therefore still copyrighted, right? So perhaps the second most well-known Hebrew poet in current Hebrew culture is Natan Alterman, and he died in 1970. So a couple of decades to go before we can, publish his works. Yet people are largely ignorant of copyright, except for Wikipedians. So people don't realize why would Alterman be missing from the site, and they write us polite or angry emails saying, what about Alterman? Isn't he a good enough poet for you? So they just assume, obviously, if you have Bialik, if you have Chernychovsky, if you have other major Hebrew poets, obviously you should have Alterman. And they interpret the presence of non-canon, which is plentiful on the site, including poets nobody's ever heard of, that I personally dug out of oblivion from the 18th century. They interpret that as irrelevant. Like, even though those people are clearly there, they still treat the collection as canonical. Which makes me ask, will all of those non-canonical authors remain non-canon? Or might they have some kind of revival thanks to the dynamic of not getting off my seat, right? I need to study some poet. Here's a poet that nobody studied. I'm going to study him. And as part of my study, I will show that he deserves to be canonical. I can't point to an example of this already happening, but then I don't read all the dissertations in Hebrew literature, so I don't know. It's worth asking anyway. I'm also an accidental publisher. So a lot of literary work is trapped, is scattered and trapped in journals, newspaper, literary supplements, etc. And unless you have been a subscriber of that newspaper in the 30s, you will probably not even know that there are these wonderful translations or essays published. If they were not collected into a book, it's that much harder to even know those things exist. And even when they were digitized in some historical newspaper archive, those archives are generally not included in Google searches unless one makes a special effort, and at least in the Hebrew case, the people who have done some digitization of old newspapers have not made that special effort. And so even a Google search would not make you stumble across those uncollected pieces. So Project Ben Yehuda is the first compiler of previously uncollected works. In some cases, for some authors, we have done the legwork of picking up those individual essays and translations published in literary supplements over the years and are presenting for the first time ever, those works as a body of work under the same page with the collected works of that author. This, of course, makes them more discoverable, which means there's more reuse. And a lot of literary estates, meaning works left behind by authors, unpublished, languish because they're not commercially viable, even if the family, the heirs, want to publish the material. If it's by an author dead for 10, 20 years, usually there's no commercial viability. The Hebrew reading market is small. So they just languish. They just lie there unpublished. Nobody ever read them. A few of those families have contacted us, and Project Ben Yehuda is the first ever publisher of some literary works by published authors, not by random people who have some text they want to express themselves with, but people who have published, have been published by major publishers, but also had some literary estate left unpublished. We are the first publishers of those texts. The fourth accident is literary liberation. I wanted to remind you of my other old friend, Ranganathan, the Indian librarian, who said simply and powerfully, I think, books are for use. Something some people sometimes need reminding of. Books are for use. And copyright law, on the one hand, and market economics on the other, are keeping a huge chunk of literature, especially Hebrew literature, which has a short history. Hebrew began to be used as a secular language for literature only around 1830 to 1850. So think about that. We don't have centuries of novels and poetry. In the case of Hebrew, a vast chunk of our modern literary tradition is in that limbo of way out of print, never be printed again, but also copyrighted. Which makes for a disjointed literary tradition, which makes for our young authors, and this is something that literary critics are complaining about for years in the Hebrew literary world, our younger authors are disconnected from the literary tradition because they literally don't know about these books published 30 or 40 years ago because they're out of print and not accessible, and not all of them do the archival research. Which makes for a kind of myopia between the literary tradition that is available, largely thanks to Project Ben Yehuda these days, going up to the 1930s, 1940s, and the present day, things that are within living memory for literary people in Israel. So, we secure permission from the copyright holders, from families, children, grandchildren of those authors, and publish those texts before the copyright expires, thereby liberating that literature from the chokehold that does nobody any good of copyright on the one hand and commercial non-viability on the other. And finally, I found myself an accidental librarian. Some more quotes by our friend Ranganathan. A library needs a catalog. I run a digital library, so I need a catalog. But because our library is born digital, I get to do it a different way. First of all, I'm not weighed down by legacy. I don't have millions of MARC records. And we catalog works, not volumes. Works. That means a 4-line poem is a catalog entity in our catalog. And a 4-volume novel is also a single entity in my catalog. Every work, every poem, every article, every short story is its own entity, first-class citizen in our Ferberish catalog. That, in turn, opens a vast universe of possibilities. We can now discuss the fact that this article, one of 300 articles in this book, is a book review about this other text, which we also have in our repository. We can start mapping these semantically rich relationships between works in our corpus. We have Hebrew authors writing about other Hebrew authors all the time, either about individual works or kind of an essay about the entire oeuvre of a certain author. And our catalog can now express those relationships for the benefit of the reader. So these were 5 accidents that happened to me. Now you know how to watch out so it doesn't happen to you. A few words about our citizenship in the wider open movement. There's already a lot of reuse happening of Project Ben Yehuda materials, especially through Wikipedia, because the moment Wikipedia links from the article about an author to the page with all the works of that author on Project Ben Yehuda, that of course drives traffic and drives people to use, to encounter these words. I didn't mention this, but of course our site is free and without advertisement. I should have mentioned it. Simple public access is the key. The fact that when you are linked to Project Ben Yehuda, or when you search for something on Google and you land in Project Ben Yehuda, you're just there. The text is right in front of you. There are no pop-ups begging you to register. There's no login screen. There are no ads. Nothing is flashing. You just get to the text. And that drives use. Wikidata, which I taught a workshop on the first day, and is our structured and linked data project, is a natural venue for interoperability and discovery. The moment Wikidata also knows that the full text works of a certain author are available on Project Ben Yehuda, that allows machine discovery of those resources, so that a librarian in Brazil could serve their Hebrew-speaking readers, if they show up, by finding them Hebrew texts without speaking a word of Hebrew themselves. Of course, we offer free and DRM-free books, meaning unencumbered by any kind of copy protection. And we also participate in the open movement by sharing our entire corpus in a dump, in a bulk download for various uses, including computational linguistics, machine learning, even computer poetry. There's a semi-famous Israeli poet and computer programmer who has been using our corpus to train his computer poetry generating programs by feeding them a whole lot of Hebrew poetry. Looking ahead for Project Ben Yehuda, I want to share with you one piece of our vision. You may have heard about massively multiplayer online role-playing games. I say, forget about that. Let's do massively multiplayer online bibliography. By which I mean a crowdsourced, with oversight and provenance, a crowdsourced bibliographic works. The first project is the table of contents of everything. So scholarly publications, which a lot of you deal with, are exceptionally well documented and handled these days, right? There's all these databases and repositories and protocols for harvesting and sharing and discovering. What about non-academic essays? What about T.S. Eliot's essays? What about travel writing? There's no good massive scale cataloging of those nonfiction works and what they are about. So a first project I would like to launch, remember this is the looking ahead, this stuff doesn't exist yet. I just have a cool name for it. The first project I'm interested in launching is a crowdsourced effort to simply create, transcribe, type, or proofread OCR tables of contents of all the books, all the materials that are essentially not already covered by the professionals. For example, nonfiction essays. The second project, which we'll be building on that, is the Aboutness project, in which I will want to take each one of those entities that I will have created in the table of contents of everything and document what they are about by, again, inviting the public to tell me what they are about. Details TBD, but basically we can offer the public to like a gamified interface to classify it by Library of Congress subject headings, by Wikidata entities, by any vocabulary that would make sense, other vocabularies in other languages. And thanks to the fact that a lot of these vocabularies are harmonized, it's okay if someone classifies by the French Rameau, is it called? You know, because we know how to map Rameau subjects to LCSH subjects, for example. So I envision a planet-wide effort to document what everything is about. And of course, this would feed back to Wikidata, which would make all of those resources even more discoverable, so that people who would never reach for a volume called Francis Bacon's Collected Essays, because who knows what's in there, will actually be able to discover the fact that Bacon wrote an article precisely about their research interest. which they would never find in a current library catalog. So, what other civilian open repositories have you not heard of? Is a question I'd like you to ponder. I haven't heard of them either. But I submit to you that similar work to this work that I've presented to you is happening all over the world, generally outside your organizations, generally outside the academy, outside companies, outside national grants. And you need to find them, talk to them, see how you can work together. Speaking of missing knowledge, I would like to suggest to you 3 assertions. So I warn you, right? You had 5 accidents, now you have 3 assertions, so you know more or less how long we have left. So my first assertion, which should not be controversial, is that the open movement has arrived. And I believe I saw a tweet earlier that made the same point. I apologize for the repetition. The open movement, in the broadest sense, free software, free culture, free knowledge, free data, has arrived. It is mainstream now. It is broadly acknowledged to be the way forward. Conservative players like governments and universities are embracing it. Business models exist around all of these things so that there can be commercial players, commercial activities supporting these movements in a healthy way. These principles of open and unconditional access have triumphed over the traditional principles of control and need to know. And that's a good thing, because that's the kind of thing that brought that CD-ROM to me when I was a teenager. Free software is running most of the web, most of your devices. Free culture is present in every reading device you have. Most reading apps will offer you Project Gutenberg titles. Free knowledge, of course, from Wikipedia and elsewhere tops search results and is consumed by more than 1 billion people every month. And free data informs news coverage, data journalism, and decision-making. My second assertion is that the open movement and traditional memory institutions are natural partners. To make this point, I will now channel my friend and fellow Wikimedian, Liam Wyatt. Liam Wyatt says, "We do the same things for the same reasons, serving the same public. We do have a different approach, different context, and different skills." Liam also says, "Do you have volunteers at your organization?" I guess many of you do. How about e-volunteers? No? Well, you do. You just don't have a relationship with them yet. Wikipedians and other free culture and free knowledge activists are your e-volunteers. You just need to create a relationship with them. So that was my channeling of Liam. I will briefly describe, for those who have not really heard or seen Wikimedia and cultural institution partnerships happen, some of the classic elements of a partnership. Of course, not all of them exist in every partnership, but basically it starts with education, educating the staff and or the patrons or management of the cultural institution about how Wikipedia works, how Wikimedia Commons works, that's our multimedia repository where all the photos and videos are kept, how Wikidata works, projects to harmonize metadata between the institution's own collections and vocabularies and Wikidata. Again, this is something most people don't know how to do, but is eminently doable. And if you are interested in doing this, contact me. I'll put you in touch with volunteers local to your location or as close to that as possible. And you can do it today or tomorrow. You can do it soon. and make sure your resources are discoverable through Wikidata. Exposure of your institutional resources via featuring them or linking to them from Wikipedia articles. Again, Wikipedia articles are the front window, are that thing that tops Google results. You know, companies pay, I don't know how many thousands of dollars to slightly improve, right, SEO and all that, slightly improve their rankings. Wikipedia is already there. If your resources are findable via a relevant Wikipedia article, you will have gotten that much more exposure. And you won't have to pay anyone anything for it. Partnerships also sometimes contain an element of content donation, where the institution donates some of its objects, digital representations of its objects, to the Wikimedia Commons. This is a technical detail, maybe not all of you know. Wikipedia will not display objects, even with IIIF, from a remote source for security reasons. Basically because it's too easy to change an external resource and replace it with an image of a penis, as people do. So Wikipedia will only include photos from our multimedia repository, from the Wikimedia Commons. That's why it's important to donate copies of your objects, even if you already have your state-of-the-art IIIF server. We cannot use it. So we are very grateful for content donations, which of course also have to be done with appropriate deference to metadata, to mapping your metadata to our metadata, usually a fairly simple task of a single afternoon and a script writing person. We do events at the institutions that host us. These can be training workshops or what we call editathons, where experienced editors show up to just hack away at the keyboard and edit, where the institution provides the materials, the sources, enabling experienced Wikipedians to make a lot of progress with resources they usually don't have access to. And digitization or transcription projects are also sometimes part of the partnership between Wikimedia and memory institutions. And finally, online contribution campaigns, such as writing contests or social media campaigns, to improve the coverage or the contents on the wiki projects related to your institution's holdings or interests. Some of those online activities have been very successful in getting content written in 15 or 20 different languages, which often your institution would not have a practical other way of generating, you know, coverage in Turkish and Arabic and Armenian. And there are elements of the partnership we have not discovered yet. The sky's the limit when you put your mind to it in terms of what we might do together. So I'll give you some examples in brief. The Wikimedian in Residence model, which was invented by my friend Liam Wyatt. He basically created that job description for himself and walked into the British Museum and said, "Hi, I would like to be your Wikimedian in Residence." And long story short, he was. So there's been work with the British Museum, with the British Library. You may have heard about the British Library's massive release of maps from their collection. So, you know, there were a whole bunch of high-quality scanned maps, but not a lot of good metadata and not a lot of good linking of those maps to the places that they describe. Wikimedia volunteers have made those links to where exactly those maps, what exactly they cover, including, I don't know what the technical term for it, but putting the modern map over the historical map and kind of synchronizing them, scaling and warping and doing what it takes so that you can actually see the modern map versus the old map. This is work the British Library would have had a hard time achieving on its own, and a lot of our enthusiastic mapping volunteers have helped do. We've done work with the US National Archive. In fact, the US National Archive has had a Wikipedia in residence for, I think, 6 years now, full-time. The Smithsonian, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, that also gave a very generous content donation to Wikipedia and the Wikimedia Commons and to Wikidata, where a lot of the MET's excellent metadata has informed and enriched the description of objects and places in Wikidata. Oxford University, the University of Edinburgh, the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, the German Federal Photo Archive. I'm just listing these names to give you an idea of the kind and caliber of institutions that have chosen to work with Wikimedia. I won't describe each and every one of these projects. The Nobel Foundation, the Versailles Palace, the Carpathian Ethnography Project. So that's a tri or quad country project to document culture and folklore in the Carpathians. It's a fieldwork project, and Wikimedians were involved with professional ethnographers in documenting and capturing and describing the interesting new knowledge about Carpathian folklore. The Bulgarian State Archives, the Museum of Romanticism in Madrid, which digitized a lot of music, a lot of recorded performances that that museum had. So those are now available for the public on Commons. And it's not only in Europe and the US. As was mentioned, I have an interest in emerging communities in the rest of the world. So we've worked with museums in Mexico, the University of Sao Paulo Museum of Veterinary Anatomy, an undercovered topic on Wikipedia, but thanks to that university, we now have good coverage of veterinary anatomy, not the kind of thing that most of our volunteers are able to supply on their own. We've done digitization projects in Chile, worked with the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, the Novosti Archive in Russia, which gave us a lot of audio samples of notable people, including non-Russian people who were interviewed on Russian radio. And sometimes it's the only available freely accessed voice sample of those people. And another interesting project from a small medical college in southern India, we got a very wonderful collection of pathology images, right? You know, liver with this disease, liver with that disease. Again, not something our volunteers can easily procure otherwise, but a Wikipedian who happened to be studying medicine at that university simply made that happen by talking to her professors. So there's plenty more examples and amazing photos to come with them in this link. The slides will be made available right after this. And finally, for those who have not attended my workshop on Monday, I will repeat the message. Wikidata is love. It is our new, shiny, structured, and linked data project. For those of you who have done any work with linked data, with triples and statements and RDF and that kind of thing, it's basically that, but on a wiki and editable by all. If that sounds crazy to you, I will remind you that is how Wikipedia works. So yes, it is crazy, but it does work. It is fantastically multilingual. If you look at Wikidata at a fairly kind of well-known topic like Barack Obama or Nelson Mandela or Lionel Messi, you will see we have labels, names for these people in 150, 200 languages. You can experience Wikidata, you can browse Wikidata in your own language with surprisingly high quality coverage. And it is a natural connection point or nexus for aligning vocabularies. Any vocabulary, any stable ID you want to harmonize with anything else, you can do via Wikidata and you'd be welcome. We don't impose our ontology on you. And a lot of, again, if you look at a central topic on Wikidata, you will find, for example, 200 or 300 external IDs, right? Like same as relationships, right? 200 IDs, like the Library of Congress and VIAF and IMDb and Music Brains and the Czech National Monuments Database and anything you care to think of. Yes, indeed. And that makes it a natural source for discovery. Indeed, you can use Wikidata to leapfrog from one database to another. If you have a VF ID for some John Smith and you want to get to the Library of Congress record for it, or the IMDb record indeed, and you want to make sure you reach the right John Smith, Wikidata's got you covered. You can look for that ID in Wikidata and then look for the other ID in the Wikidata record. And even without caring about anything else in the Wikidata item, you will have used Wikidata to discover other external resources. It is also a powerful resource for enrichment of your holdings. Wikidata can often provide easy to machine generate little annotations or enriched details for things that may not be the focus of your collection and therefore not very well described in your collection, but you can still, I don't know, if it's, for example, a place of birth of a person in your collection, but you don't have particular expertise about geography and toponyms, etc., Wikidata's got you covered and can help you resolve that toponym and show all the relevant information about that, for example. And it is about to become, later this year, a powerful digital object management platform. I don't know if many of you realize that. We have a project called Structured Data on Commons, which will transform our veteran existing multimedia library commons into one that is based on structured and linked data like Wikidata, so that you will be able to, for example, query the entire library of 46 million freely licensed files for anything that depicts sowing seeds, for example. You'll be able to query for that, or for anything that depicts raising children coupled with, I don't know, location Germany. That kind of search. Again, the arbitrarily complicated searches that linked data and Sparkle allow you to do, you will be able to do on our 46 million file media library later this year. So I encourage you to learn Wikidata today before it becomes mainstream, so that you can be a Wikidata hipster and say, oh yeah, Wikidata, I knew it before it was cool. So remember, we are talking about 3 assertions. My third assertion is that there are huge gaps in what we have in the wiki projects. There are huge geographical gaps, gender gaps, access gaps, and cultural gaps. This map shows participation in Wikimedia projects by country. The darker, the more participation per capita or per 10,000 people we have. So the map is not very surprising, I guess. We have a lot of participation in Western Europe, in North America, less in South America, next to nothing in Africa. So this map is not very surprising, but it is a participation gap, right? We have far too few people participating from Nigeria. We have far too few people participating from Kazakhstan and from Vietnam. This somewhat similar map is completely different, actually. This is a map of the coverage of topics. So every dot in this map is an item in Wikidata that has coordinates. So we put it on a map. Any item of any kind, right? A building, a monument, whatever. Again, you can see Western Europe is extraordinarily well covered, and North America, the rest of the world, very, very sparse. The first map was colored by the entire country, right? This one is more precise because it's the actual coordinates. So you can see even within a country, the huge, huge gaps. Wikidata, for example, is aware of only about 3 hospitals in the entire country of Ghana. There are more than 3 hospitals in Ghana, but Wikidata doesn't know that. The percentage of editors of Wikipedia that explicitly identify as female. So we have a gender field. It is optional, so optional that we don't even include it in our sign-up procedure. Like, you have to actually go to the preferences to set it, which is why the vast majority of users never set it. But of those who do, only between 9 and 17% identify as female. Now, this is likely underrepresentative because there's no doubt there's a quantity of women who choose not to identify as female or even to explicitly identify as male because of harassment, which is a very sad and unfortunate fact on the projects as on the wider internet. So we can assume that there are in fact a little more than that, but definitely nowhere near 50-50. And again, that was about the participation gender gap. This is about the content gap. The percentage of women among the people described on our projects is about 18%, right? So the articles about women, which of course don't have to be written by women, right, are about 18%. It is not unreasonable to think that greater participation by women in the projects will also involve greater coverage of women, although again, there's no necessary connection. So we consider these gaps a knowledge equity challenge. That's the term we use in the Wikimedia movement as of last year, knowledge equity. And it has become, just earlier this year, one of our 2 strategic goals for the next 12 years. One of the 2 things we're going to focus on very strongly in ways that are TBD, but the Wikimedia movement has committed to do something. We don't quite know what that something is yet about these knowledge equity issues. And again, it's not just these gender and geography gaps, it's also the access to the internet gap, etc. But these are actually things we are less well positioned to do much about. So we've been doing something about these gaps already. We've done a bunch of research, which is how we came up with these numbers. We have been doing themed editathons. Some of you may have heard of them. A lot of writing drives and competitions and campaigns to write about notable women, to write women back into history, to narrow the gender gap, et cetera, et cetera. We've had themed contests to add content about Africa. All of these were successful. All of these, moved the needle somewhat, but there's a long way to go. And we need to do a lot more with the heavier lifting, including culture change. We have a culture problem in Wikipedia that perpetuates some of this systemic bias. For example, an editor on Wikipedia may delete an article because it relies on a source like the Lagos Times from Nigeria, just because that editor has never heard of the Lagos Times and doesn't realize that is a perfectly valid newspaper to rely on, even if it's not the New York Times. That kind of behavior is an additional hurdle that is encountered by people trying to cover, for example, African topics on Wikipedia. And undoing that is a lot harder than doing a writing competition and generating a few hundred articles. There's the challenge of oral knowledge. So, the Wikimedia vision is to create a world in which every human being can freely share in the sum of all knowledge. A very ambitious vision. That's a good thing for a vision. But the sum of all knowledge is not in academic writing, right? The sum of all knowledge includes a whole lot of knowledge that isn't and never will be in academic sources. Some of that knowledge is also not written, oral knowledge. And that's a huge challenge for our projects. How does an encyclopedia reflect oral knowledge? How do we cite oral knowledge? These are questions that have potential answers. We need to do the thinking, and like I said, we need a culture change. We need to convince our community, not all of which sees what we see, what I'm telling you right now. We need to convince them that yes, oral knowledge does matter. It's not all tribal knowledge or indigenous knowledge. Some of it is perfectly important historical knowledge, geographical knowledge, not scientific knowledge perhaps, but knowledge about things science also is interested in, like the medicinal properties of plants, for example. And we need to find a way to include more of that knowledge on the projects. That is a formidable challenge facing the Wikimedia movement. Formidable especially because it's not actually a technical challenge. There's no amount of investment in software that we can do to solve it. And we need to combat harassment. Harassment is a huge issue on the internet, as you well know. It is also an issue on our projects, even though we have a civility policy and we have tools like blocking and identifying what we call sock puppets, people trying to impersonate other accounts. We need better tools, and we need stronger culture to put a stop to the harassment that some people do still encounter, including our opening keynote speaker, on the Wikimedia projects. Again, this is something we have newly recommitted to this year for our upcoming strategy. So I want to end by sharing with you a few specific challenges that the Wikimedia movement and the free culture movement in general encounters trying to partner with memory institutions in emerging communities. First, budget. You know this one. I don't need to say a lot about it. It's generally an obstacle for most institutions, including over here in North America, in Western Europe. Everybody's complaining about the budget. But the scale is different in some emerging communities. When I say emerging communities, I'm referring to our emerging communities, places where the Wikimedia and the free knowledge community is still emerging, that largely overlaps to what was known as the Global South or the developing world, but also includes some places that are not considered Global South. Like, for example, Portugal is an emerging community in terms of its free knowledge production. So in emerging communities, budgetary problems can be so severe they do not allow even that little leeway to experiment, to try something new, to do anything beyond the routine. On the other hand, on occasion, actually the lack of budget could drive collaboration. For example, in a certain African country, the National Heritage Authority or something, the government body responsible for monuments and heritage, confided in us, in Wikimedia volunteers, that they are so cash-strapped, they have not visited a lot of the monuments that they are in charge of for over a decade. So they literally have no idea what physical shape these monuments are in, if they need repairs, if anything about what's going on there. It's a big country, and they literally cannot afford to do the kind of mapping, the oversight that they are supposedly in charge of, which made them very happy, indeed eager, to partner with our volunteers in a photography competition we had there called Wiki Loves Monuments, where we went and photographed every single one of those monuments for us, for Commons, to be able to illustrate Wikipedia articles with it, but it was also a huge service to that heritage authority because it literally gave them fresh photos of those monuments and helped them, prioritize maintenance, etc. More poignant, I think, is the tech literacy issue. Again, not a unique issue to emerging communities, but more strongly felt there among staff of institutions, among management of institutions. There are still, and I have met some people like that, who are directors or general managers of cultural institutions or government ministries in charge of cultural institutions who are completely computer illiterate, who do not have a computer on their desk, and they have people for handling that, but they themselves, the decision makers, the people whom the other people are looking to for approval to do something, they themselves are so far out of the reach of modern computer digital culture, it's very hard to get that nod, to get that approval from the person in charge. But also the availability of tech skills among staff, that script person, right? That person who needs to do the 10-line Ruby or Python program to munge the data from this into that, or to use OpenRefine or whatever. Those people are just not there in many institutions. And when they're not there, it's as good as impossible to move forward. Sometimes our own volunteers can supply that tech literacy. It's not always enough because they're not part of the bureaucracy, they're not part of the organization. And sometimes our own volunteers lack the tech skills in emerging communities. This is something that you would not encounter for the most part out here in North America, in Europe. There's plenty of experienced Wikipedians who are also software engineers or hackers or free software people, or even if they're not, it's easy to round up someone from the local Python club and get their help. It's a lot harder in other parts of the world. There are just fewer programmers, fewer people with the confidence and skills to handle complex metadata. The third challenge is what I like to call Smog, the dragon from The Hobbit. And these are the kinds of librarians or collection owners who believe their job is to lie on the pile of gold and defend it from use. These are the mortal enemies of Ranganathan and me. They believe their job is to prevent access and to preserve, right, just to preserve, to keep the gold safe, the books safe from use. These people, again, are, I hope I can say, a dying breed in most of the world, but you still encounter them a lot in places like India. This is a particularly sore point for me because when I was a kid in a small town in Israel, I pretty much finished the children's library at some point when I was, I don't know, 10. And there was one librarian there who would not let me even enter the grown-up library to forage for new books. And happily, the other librarian did let me, so I had to coordinate my visits with the other librarian's schedule. But I have never forgiven that first librarian. This also reminds me of Mordak, the preventer of information services from Dilbert. He seems to share that ethic that in an ideal world, nobody would access anything. Yeah, so those people are still around. Then there's the conservatives, the people who are concerned about, is anyone else doing this crazy thing you're offering here? Is anyone else talking to you, weird people from the internet? To which the answer is, of course, yes, as I've shown you in the previous slides. But very often people want a local example, right? Is the library next door, is the other university doing this yet? Even when you show them that, yes, Harvard, British Museum, the National Archive have all worked with us, they want to know if the other university in the next town is doing it or not, or if the minister in this country has approved it or not. And again, this is a pattern we've observed. I'm making generalizations, obviously, but it is based on our aggregate experience. I have observed in emerging communities a much greater reluctance to take initiative, to dare at anything but the top level executive. Everybody's looking upwards for the nod, and even department managers, collection managers, branch managers, any kind of mid-level, even senior mid-level management usually does not dare take the plunge. They're all looking at the executive director. Sometimes the executive director is not enough because they're looking at the minister or the CEO of the national authority or whatever. There's frequently just zero room for individual initiative. And that has been our entry point in other countries, right? It's often been that one curator who got it, that one librarian who was with it and tried something and did something, and then we were able to show management, hey, look at this thing we did. That chance to start small, to pilot, to co-conspire with someone at the staff level is often denied us in emerging communities. And finally, and most painfully, corruption. This is something that breaks my heart every time anew when our volunteers in emerging communities manage to negotiate some kind of partnership, some agreement, the all-important MOU, without which nothing happens in certain parts of the world. They do that. For example, in a country I will not name, in Western Africa, there's been an agreement with the head of the National Archive that Wikimedia volunteers will get to digitize materials from the National Archive. There was a signed MOU, no charge, everything's great. The volunteers show up at the National Archive, and the staff at the archive refuses to cooperate, despite the MOU. When the volunteers start negotiating what's going on, what do we need to do, they're told, oh yeah, but the photocopier is broken, so you cannot photocopy anything. So they come back the next week, the photocopier is still broken, the photocopier is broken to this day, and it later emerges that the photocopier isn't really broken, it's just that by claiming the photocopier is broken, the archive staff gets to say, well, you can walk over, to the equivalent of a Kinko and photocopy it there, but of course we can't give you archival material to do this, so we would have to do it for you, for which of course they would like a small gratuity. So it emerged that in fact the staff was determined to make a buck using this scheme for every piece of paper, for every document they wanted to digitize, which of course renders the project impossible for us to move forward with. We tried escalating this to the director of the National Archive, promised to look into it, and nothing happened. Later, inside sources told us the reason is the director professionally depends on that person who was running that racket. Right? The director is new and doesn't know enough about the actual arrangement of the archive, and this person knows where everything is, and so they cannot afford to open a conflict with that staff person. So that was the end of our attempt to work with that National Archive, and we don't see a way forward until those people change. Another example is those monuments that we go around and take photos of in a different African country. We got an MOU again with the head of the Heritage Authority that allows us to go into all the monument sites, including ones that are not generally open to the public, armed with the MOU, and take photos, and also free of charge in sites that charge an entrance fee. That's all written in the MOU. Our volunteers happily travel to all corners of the country, show up with the MOU. The local person, person at the gate, refuses to honor the MOU and says, nope, you need to pay, because it turns out they kind of pocket half that pay. So they had no interest in granting free entrance, and nothing helped. There was no way to call the central authority, etc., and the trip was wasted because they insisted on charging them money. So people have these little fiefdoms, and they are able to just ignore even the good intentions of the top management, even when we are able to convince them. The final example I will give you is that an archaeology department, also in Africa, and African archaeology is a woefully undercovered topic, not just in Wikipedia, but on the internet in general. Even if you just look at the articles about archaeology, like the topic in general, or stratigraphy, or topics in archaeology, you will find all the examples are from European stratigraphy, European Iron Age concepts, and they're just different in Africa, and most of our content doesn't acknowledge that. So an archaeology department in Africa was happy to work with us, believes in our vision, wants African archaeology to be better represented on the web, gets it. And at the end of the very good meeting we had, they said, but we need to run it by the university's PR department. And the university's PR department is terrified of commercial exploitation. They don't know to explain what kind of commercial exploitation they're particularly worried about in publishing some archaeological finds, but they're terrified of it. And they're terrified of being blamed for it. Nobody wants to take the responsibility for having given the go-ahead. Great reluctance on all sides to own it, right? So that the archaeology professor wouldn't own the risk and say, no, I'm giving you permission, go ahead and do it, because they're terrified of the PR department or the rector or whatever. The PR department finds it easier to say no, of course, than to take a risk and say yes, and that's where things stop. All right, that sounds tough. What does work? So some things that do work in our experience are showing people case studies, literally walking them through. Here's what we did with the Versailles Palace. Here's what the palace got out of it. To give you a super quick example, the German Photo Archive, the German Federal Photo Archive, donated 100,000 priceless historical photos to Wikimedia more than 10 years ago. They felt they were basically doing Wikipedia a favor. You know, they didn't expect to get any benefit out of it themselves. To their surprise, not only did traffic to their own website grow 200% just from people clicking through on images on Wikipedia, finding that the statement that says, you know, this image comes from the German Federal Photo Archive, and then clicking further to actually see, oh, the German Federal Photo Archive, that's interesting. What other stuff do they have? Just those people, which is, of course is a fraction of the people who visit the page, just that was enough to double their traffic, which is something they were happy to show their managers in terms of investing in their web presence. And the second surprising thing is that they began to receive a steady stream of metadata corrections. Oh yeah, Wikipedians are detail obsessed, and they started going through those historical photos and saying, nope, that's not 1981, that's 1918, there's a typo here. Or nope, that cannot be Köln because Köln was bombed on this year, so it has to be Mainz, or you know, this is not this church, it's that church. Correcting photograph metadata. Now, if you ask the Federal Photo Archive, do you have mistakes in your metadata? They'll say, well, of course we do. And if you ask them, well, why don't you fix them? They'll tell you, well, it's never a good day to, you know, drop everything and fix 50 million records of metadata, right? But what if you get a stream of highly informed and usually correct corrections from people who sometimes include footnotes in their corrections? Well, that's priceless. And they got such a steady stream, they literally had to hire a temp, you know, a student part-time, just to kind of triage and handle those corrections. So that's just a brief example of a case study that when you say that to people, if they do care about the quality of their metadata, they may find that appealing. So that kind of thing does work. And testimonials from you through professional networks that we volunteers don't have access to, that can work too. If you're able to do a pilot, a small pilot, an off-mainstream pilot, that is often better than all the talk in the world. For example, in India, where we had the hardest time creating even a single GLAM partnership, there was a beautiful partnership in Kolkata, in West Bengal, with an eccentric person who runs something called the Kolkata Little Magazine Library and Research Center. It's basically a shop. I don't know what this guy sells, but the shop is also a magazine library and research center. So his personal obsession, passion, is collecting historical magazines from Bengal's rich history going back to colonial times, magazines in English and Bengali, amazing treasure troves of information on culture, on literature, on politics, on colonialism. And he has copies. He does not have a way of digitizing them. He's not a librarian. He's not an archivist. He's a passionate amateur. He met our passionate amateurs from Wikipedia. They helped him digitize some of those magazines, transcribed them in English and Bengali, and made them available on Wikisource, where now they can re-enter the digital bloodstream and people can start finding them, stumbling onto them, citing them, etc. This is just a partnership between two passionate partners outside any academic or librarian circle. But with that, we can show these results. We can talk to libraries and show them the benefit of the work. if we invest in community building as we do, we invest in our own volunteer communities, in training them the skills, so that our volunteer can come to an institution and know about metadata, about XML, about OpenRefine, about scripting, about the alphabet soup that all y'all use. That is something we need to invest in so that to make those partnerships more likely. And we are spending some time in training our volunteers who are, you know, random people from the internet on how to talk to partners, how to talk to people in suits. I'm glad most of you are not. But how to talk to grown-ups, how to talk to people who are professionals in their field, how to use their vocabulary, how to speak our message in ways that will be heard. And finally, partnering outside your own field. One thing we've found very useful is to engage free software hackers who are not interested in editing the encyclopedia, but who are interested in programming against a cool API. You talk to them about the Wikipedia API, the Wikidata API, the challenge of munging metadata from here to there, consuming a JSON service, and they might be willing to help you with absolutely no interest in what Wikipedia does with it later. And those communities are easier to find than free culture communities. There's more free software communities around the world. So we've had some success engaging free software people around the world, and this applies to you as well, of course. For those of you who don't have a very developed technical department or who have an understaffed technical department, there are free software hackers out there who may be excited to work on your challenges. They just don't know about them. They don't know about Samvera, they don't know about the tools we use, they don't know that we use open source code and APIs. The shift to open technologies in this space has been really breathtaking, I think, in the last 10 years. But a lot of free software hackers who don't happen to have a volunteer interest in libraries don't know about it. Not banging endlessly against walls, we have found helps. So we're done with that African National Archive. You know, they'll come around sooner or later. We're focusing on other opportunities. So don't focus, don't obsess on getting that one thing you wanted to get. Work with whoever is willing. And we can build on the precedent of success. Take the local success, make it international, take a modest success, translate it into a more ambitious project. In conclusion, I want to share with you the thought that a lot depends still on individual initiative and volunteerism. And these volunteers are there. You need to find them and cultivate them. Again, what Liam said, create a relationship with your e-volunteers. They're out there and waiting to work with you. And I also want to remind you that authority happens whether we like it or not. And all your fine IRs and protocols and preservation for the ages are great for people like me who know and understand these technologies and who rely on them long term. I mean, who but me knows what an amateur I am? But for the vast majority of the public, my site is far more visible, far more useful, and even undeservedly gets a halo of authority. Some of this will get easier with time. Generational changes, people move on, people born into technology take their place, and public demand is gradually creating pressure on governments, on local authorities to make things available. From data to laws. There are countries out there where the law of the land is not actually available to the citizens, right? Only lawyers who buy expensive CD-ROMs or subscription services have access to the law. How crazy is that? People in 7th century BC Athens, see, I'm doing it again, have had a revolution demanding that the laws be written down. There are countries today with less access to the law than ancient Athenians. I also want to suggest to you that these days with cloud computing, etc., and containers and Dockers and all that, tech affluent organizations I say tech affluent. It doesn't have to be really money affluent, but basically the organizations you're all affiliated with are tech affluent, can do a lot more for your colleagues in emerging communities. It is super easy, if you're already on the cloud, if you already have those resources, to spin up another instance for another institution in the developing world to play with, to learn, to experiment. Even if for a whole variety of legal and bureaucratic reasons, you won't actually be able to host their actual IR or whatever in the long term, maybe you can just offer them this training ground, this opportunity to learn, to understand the benefits, to help explain it to their management. Maybe you don't need to tell your management you're doing it. My point is, it's super easy to do. I think more of that needs to happen. And finally, my truly final thought, consider interacting with Wikidata in everything you do. Pretty much everything you do has some potential contact point with Wikidata. If you're not sure how to find that, talk to me. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you for helping me make stone soup.
So thank you so much for that. That was really great. We are actually scheduled to be done now, but we still need a few more minutes of your time, and I think that you probably do have some questions. So if you do need to leave, please feel free to do so, but otherwise, I think we'll open up the floor to a couple of questions.
That was really interesting, thank you. Whenever I've tried to engage with the community to get a response back from just people out there, I've always struggled. And one of the reasons I think that is because on organizations like Wikimedia, people are, and correct me if I'm wrong, editing things that they care about personally. Whereas when we have our open community here, very often people care professionally, and so there's, I think, a much greater limit of what they're willing to give, particularly in their own time. Is there any way around that? Like how can we get out there to get people to be more giving to the community when it's more of a professional capacity they're operating in rather than kind of something they personally care about?
Thank you, that's a good question. First of all, the standard way of interacting with Wikipedians on Wikipedia is by editing what we call talk pages, right? Behind every article there's a talk page, and that's where our kind of binding conversations happen. However, and that takes a little getting used to and a little learning, and maybe that itself is putting a lot of people off from interacting with Wikipedians, which of course is a shame. So one thing that does exist these days is a whole bunch of alternative channels and networks that are around Wikipedia. So you won't be able, for example, to undelete an article or change policy on Wikipedia by talking on Facebook. But you will be able to get help, to get advice, to just talk, to discuss a potential partnership, absolutely, on Facebook, on mailing lists, and there's a whole bunch of resources. There's a specific mailing list for Wikipedia and libraries, which has a lot of librarians on it and a lot of Wikipedians who understand libraries on it. So that's a perfect venue, for example, to discuss this sort of thing. There's a more general GLAM mailing list. There are Facebook groups for GLAM. There are Facebook groups for Wikipedia, where, again, it's a much more casual way of interacting that will be easier for people. But to take the other side of your question about how to get people from your professional circles to engage more with Wikipedia, I want to share the message. Wikipedia, there are like 101 ways to help Wikimedia beside writing an article like The Causes of World War II from start to finish. That's one kind of thing we do on Wikipedia, and that's what most people imagine when they think about editing Wikipedia. But you can help by fixing typos, you can help by adding references, which is what most of you are amply able to do because you live in a library. I know, you actually go home sometimes. classifying photography, harmonizing metadata. There's a whole bunch of things you can do that don't require you to learn all the policies of Wikipedia or to edit, to write articles from start to finish. I think a lot of professionals don't know that. They feel, yeah, contributing to Wikipedia, that means writing articles. I'm not interested in that. That's okay. You know, writing encyclopedic articles is a weird hobby. I say this with love. I'm weird, but not everybody has to be weird. So again, I think the beginning of a conversation is to socialize the idea that there's a whole bunch of ways to work with this community. Many of them right up the alley of professionals like you.
Thank you for the talk. I really appreciate Wikipedia. I use it all the time. It was interesting to learn about your related projects. I'm wondering, I'm thinking about your, you're wanting to be more inclusive and include more articles about women and people from, underrepresented areas. And I'm wondering if there's any relation between Wikipedia insisting on using only secondary sources for articles about people who are barely represented in secondary sources to begin with as being a compounding factor for that occurrence.
Absolutely. That is a huge factor in the underrepresentation of women, of topics about Africa, about Laos. I mean, secondary literature, as we understand it in the West, has taken an interest in certain things and not in others. Women classical music composers have been demonstrably and systematically written out of history so that we now need alternative references to unearth women composers that did demonstrably exist. And some of the conservative Wikipedians will reject them because they don't appear in the whatever big book of classical composers. So yes, there's a huge sourcing issue and documentation challenge. And I think the feminist movement has actually shown us the way decades ago. Part of the feminist project in the 50s, the 60s was setting up these documentation centers to start collecting the stuff that was written out of history. And some of these projects are now perfectly respectable sources and make up the bedrock of research today. We need a lot more of that kind of work. So it's not all about picking the right source. Sometimes it's actually about generating some sources. And again, people from the library and repository world can really help in some kind of voluntary, expert-led, but public participatory project for the documentation, for tagging, for annotation. These are all things that indirectly will feed into Wikipedia by becoming citable sources.
I think we have time for one more question.
I'll stick around if anyone else wants to ask questions.
Hi, I really appreciate your talk. Sorry, didn't mean to scare you. In my work with the putting the national parks collections online, we find extremely impassioned communities that are willing to help us fix any metadata or flip an image if it's the wrong way. But in my own institution, I face this constant battle of we need to watermark, we need to remove high-res downloads so people don't sell things as calendars. We need to not put this online unless the metadata is perfect. And maybe I'm just venting here, but your message really spoke to me and I appreciate it. And I don't know if you have anything to offer in terms of dealing with that.
We do. We have some kind of FAQs, some kind of written explanations on why watermarks are evil and why it's not actually such a huge problem if someone prints a calendar with, your photo. What's the? I mean, is your institution in the business of selling calendars? Is that So what's the harm? Books are for use. Remember. That's our basic approach, but we do have some, written case studies that show the benefit. The story I told about the German photo archive, for example, shows an unexpected side benefit of releasing your stuff that could be priceless for your institution, depending, of course, on how much attention we can get volunteers to devote to the materials you contribute. But yeah, we do have some materials like that. You can write to me and I'll share them.
Asaf, on behalf of all of us in Open Repositories on the Program Planning Committee, I want to thank you so much for being here today. You have proven yourself to be exceedingly accessible and have offered to stay after for questions. So thank you again for your really phenomenal talk. Thank you.
You're welcome. And the moose is available for selfies too.
So everyone, what we're going to do now is we're going to have some prizes for posters and the Ideas Challenge, and some thank yous, because that's what we do at the end, isn't it? And then we're going to hand over to our colleagues from Hamburg so you can find out a bit about next year.
Okay, so on behalf of Montana State University and Montana State University Libraries, I want to thank you all so much for being here. This conference wouldn't be anything without all the presenters, all the interactions from people, the Ideas Challenge. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And it also wouldn't be possible without financial sponsorship and community sponsorship. So thank you to our major sponsors, Atmire and the Montana State University Library, our many and generous sponsors. I won't read all their names, but you know who they are. And then, sorry, I thought it was on my slide. We really, really, really appreciate your involvement in the community and your involvement financially in this conference. My next, yes. And then, spoiler alert, posters. I get to thank the winners. So we had 3 posters from the 3 different dots. I don't have. So this is. I don't have the notes on people's names with me. Do you? Yeah, but. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, sorry. This is Julie Allison and Stephanie Taylor from the University of London. This is the most artistic poster. Okay, and they unfortunately had to leave. And then this poster is the most in line with the theme of Sustaining Open. It's from For Science, so it's Susanna, Andrea, and Claudio. Oh, and then I'm sorry, I'm not looking. That's not a. This computer is weird, and I apologize for that. And then this is, as you can read, best overall. So Daniela Lowenberg. And if you are any of those people, congratulations. And if you are representing them and you want to see Mick for a prize,
Oh, but you are a prize.
yeah, sorry about those slides.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to use this because nobody can see me. Oh, damn. I did something. Okay, so the Ideas Challenge winners are the yellow bison bear. So you may go over and pick your prizes from the table. And then the runner-up is Unicode Sparkle. Yay. You may also go pick your prizes. And you might want to do that now because it turns out everybody who participated can get a prize. Yay! So if you are here and you participate in the Ideas Challenge, you can get a prize. You can't bring one back for your friends, though. So feel free to head on over.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Sarah Shreves from the University of Arizona. I'm the vice chair of the Open Repository Steering Committee, and it's time for thank yous. So my first thank you goes out to the Program Planning Committee. So could everyone on the Program Planning Committee please stand up? So a big thank you to this group. They put a lot of time and energy into making sure this program was as good as it was, and we really appreciate the efforts. We also want to do a very special thank you to our program chairs, Claire and Aviva. Could you please? On behalf of both the host committee and the steering committee, we have gifts for you, so thank you. So they put in, they just put in hours and hours, weeks of time, and just did a fantastic job. So thank you so much. And then I think I pass this on to more thank yous. So, yep.
So we would like to thank our steering committee chairs. So Aylin and of course Sarah. So thank you to both of you and really to all of steering. This has been a really phenomenal experience for both of us. So thank you. We'd like to thank our local hosts. This is pretty much what they've done for the last week, but this is who they really are. Layla, could you come up here for a second? All right, we're gonna get a little mushy for just a second, so bear with us. Layla, this is for you. So, just so that you know, Layla basically made a lot of this happen completely behind the scenes. She worked with us. We really thought of her as kind of our third co-chair. She was amazing and a phenomenal person to work with. And if you ever get a chance to work with her, do it. She's like a constant cheerleader, happy energizer bunny person. It's amazing. Thank you.
We want to thank all of you for making this happen. There would be no conference without submissions, without reviewers, without you all paying the money to be here, without the contributions and the questions. It's been amazing seeing people contribute to the Google Docs, which we've never done before, to share the conference with people who can't be here. And it's really hard planning lots of tracks, and it's really hard making the decisions of what to go to. And doing that means that people can go and look at things they couldn't go to and look back at notes and also hopefully listen slightly more when they're there. So thank you everybody for doing that and also contributing to our metadata zoo. It was really, you forget sometimes that all these acronyms we use. I know I find it at work, you go into meetings and people are like, oh yeah, what's that? And especially for newbies to learn. So I think it's great that that was set up and that everybody contributed to that. So thank you very much. You can give yourself a clap as well. So it's whizzed by after months and months of planning. So thank you, everybody. And this is the end of Open Repositories 2018 in Bozeman, Montana.
But
so,
wait. Open Repositories 2019.
Yes, start looking for flights. So we're going to hand over to next year's local host. Thank you.
I'm Kai.
Hi, I'm Iris, or if you wanna, you choose the English pronunciation, Iris.
Hi, I'm Juliane.
And I'm Hagen.
First of all, we would like to express our thanks to the organizers, the local hosts, and everybody making this conference happen, because we had so much fun, got so much inspiration, and really had a great time here. I won't go into lengths, but just thank you. As you probably already heard, we will have the honor to host this great conference next year in Hamburg. So it takes place from the 10th to the 13th of June. And we're really looking forward to this challenging opportunity. We're quite happy that quite a few have already mentioned that they're planning on coming to Hamburg, but for those of you who are still undecided, we prepared some material to maybe convince you how great Hamburg is. And the next video doesn't actually have any text because it's a university video, but it's not the ending. Please just sit back and enjoy for a few minutes. Oh.
Yeah, but the internet was great, you know, until now. No, it's if it doesn't work, it's not that.
So in 1919, the University of Hamburg was established. So 2009 will be a very special year for us. And as you can see, this is the main building where the conference venue will be. And this is the very historic main building of the university, which is located in the center of, the city.
This is my keyword, and I have to tell you something about the city now. So Hamburg is not only the place where we work, but also where we live, and it's a great place to live. As the second largest city of Germany, it is a traffic junction of the north, and it has an amazing harbor region in which these old storehouses and also the shipyards combine the old and new to yeah, maritime flavor that you should really not miss to experience. And nightlife is amazing. It's exciting. There are many museums, bars, sites to visit. So even if you're not at a conference, you won't feel bored to get out and experience the city, and it will last. Yeah.
So we have a schedule that's not fixed yet, but so you can see what happens when. We'll probably have a call for papers by November and a deadline for submissions in January. Registration will probably open in February, and you will know whether your submission is accepted by March. And the conference, as you already know, will happen between June 10th and 13th. So we all hope to see you next year over in Hamburg, and everything worth noticing will be published on our website. That's online already on or2019.net. So thank you and see you next year. I guess this is the end now.
It's not clear.